Uh, Ma'am, we can start in a minute.
Okay.
I will start. I will add the participants at 11 o'clock exactly. I have added all the participants. We can start. We are also live on YouTube now.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Garima Rohila. I'm director in AICT, and I welcome all the eminent professors from various universities who are attending the webinar and spare their valuable time for such a dedicated talk. And I especially welcome Change Inc., who has taken the initiative for awareness of inclusion of students with specific learning disability in higher education with hand holding with AICT. Welcome Changing and welcome all the participants. It is our collective responsibility to ensure that every individual gets the opportunity to learn and work in appropriate environment. Differently abled people have strong willpower, but they need some support from the system. And AICT wants to make sure that all differently abled students are aware of opportunities and initiatives for their growth and learning process. For this, AICT is offering a scheme named Saksham for differently able students. And there is a SWAM platform available for in AICT for providing the MOOCs for differently able students. From last 2 years, AICT had conducted many webinars on PWD students. One webinar was on dyslexia in 2021, sorry, in which panelists expressed their views on the problems related to dyslexia and also the importance of awareness regarding it. In the next webinar, the area for improvement in dyslexic children were identified and shared many online tools for dyslexic students. Last year also, AICT had conducted 5 webinars on inclusion of specific disability in university and educational institutes. Finally, I want to say that you all will be benefited from this webinar, and I wish this happens to be a wonderful session. Bhavya, you can continue, please. All the best for the session.
Thank you so much for the wonderful introduction, ma'am. So at Changing Foundation, we are focused on building equitable ecosystems that accelerate mainstreaming inclusion of over 200 million Indians with learning disabilities. Our approach follows a cradle to career path, and we do this to drive innovation, productivity, and growth for India to become a $10 trillion economy by 2035. So before we dive into the presentation, I would request all of you to scan this QR code and to take a quick 2 minute survey. Okay, we can start. So I would like you to let me know in the chat, or you can unmute and let me know that according to you, from this picture, who do you think has a specific learning disability? Any guesses, any idea? Does anybody want to contribute? Yeah, I see your hand raised. Um,
Second person?
okay. Any other guesses? Okay. Um, guy with a beard. Okay, so the point of this activity is actually to um, the point of this activity actually is to show that specific learning disabilities are invisible and it's impossible to tell whether a person has it by just looking at them. And we'll further uncover more about specific learning disabilities and how they manifest. So, understanding neurodiversity as a larger umbrella, it include specific learning disabilities, which include dyslexia, dyscalculia, dysgraphia, dyspraxia. We'll learn more about these. And they also include, neurodiversity also includes autism and ADHD. Neurodiversity means that there's a difference in the way people's brains function, process, and learn information. These are individuals, so people with specific learning disabilities are individuals who have an average or above average IQ. It's a lifelong condition that runs in families. Access to accommodations, assistive technologies can often help these individuals excel through their lifetime. Like we discussed, it's an invisible disabilities and can only be diagnosed through psychometric testing. Unemployment and underemployment are key challenges for this cohort. Now let's understand how specific learning disabilities manifest. So as you can see, the letters are mirroring, everything is moving. This is how dyslexia impacts language processing, and it accounts for at least 80% of all SLDs. It's the common of all SLDs. Dyscalculia impacts math. It affects people's numerical applications, quantification, and it affects about 5% of the population within the SLD community. Then there's dysgraphia, which impacts writing. So this again is diagnosed in childhood. It affects a person's handwriting ability as well as their fine motor skills, like holding the pen itself. And as you can see that the sentence, as we're seeing the handwritten sentence, that's how a person with dysgraphia is likely to write. We'll now watch a video to understand from a lived experience of a successful dyslexic person.
The refrain was उसको आता सब कुछ है ये पता नहीं एग्जाम में क्या करता है because when it came to spelling my grammar was all over the place and for whatever reasons I'm not blaming the teachers. It maybe they themselves were clueless. I was very good at maths. My science was good, but everything to be judged by the written words, then that used to fail me. And for me, then I never looked, but I was very good at maths. I gave my JEE twice. I cleared both the times. I wanted to do physics. I came and did physics. And again, the thing is that JEE again is a paper which does not judge you on your on your written skill. It's basically your logic and the maths. So there I've excelled. I was lucky enough to work for InfoEdge Group, which was a startup. And these places, I mean, the thing is, if you're good, it's pure meritocracy. So if you're good, you keep getting opportunities.
So we learn from Vivek's experience that if you're not judged for what you can't do, but you're uplifted for what you can do, there's a lot that you can achieve. If the system doesn't fail you in terms of calling you names or labeling you in terms of your limitations, but instead they try and help you out with leveraging your strengths, there's a lot that you can achieve. Okay. I will now ask a volunteer to read this text. Anybody, you can unmute and just start reading this text, and you have 60 seconds.
VP9 in our trip at a familiar blaze on Dob, Dobbs lick yours and view tea contains in your trillium cells that mark together GQCQ of within each of these one cells. Each UDA has DNA. The DNA code is exactly the Q. Ways propic resume. So the cob, it is very difficult to read.
Yeah, so exactly, that's the point. It is very difficult to read, and this is how a person with um, this was just to give you a sense of what the person with dyslexia would struggle with, and the real text looks like this.
Okay, okay, we begin our trip at a familiar place. Yeah, this is much
Yeah,
more easier.
yeah. Um, we'll do another activity real quick. So I will request you to read the color and not the word that appears.
Okay,
And we have to do this quickly.
okay, this is violet, this is gray, and then it is red.
Okay.
Yellow, gray, black, then it is gray, red, and I think so it is purple, and then it is black, yellow, yellow, and then it is purple.
Yeah. So this was another activity to show that a person with dyslexia often struggles with instructions, and there's different ways for them to process information. Moving on, there's three aspects of dyslexic struggles. Specific learning disabilities will always impact three spheres of a person's life, which will be life skills, their academics, as well as their emotional well being. So, when a person is struggling in all three areas, only then do we recommend that they go for a screening or for a diagnosis, because it's a disability that works at the intersection of these struggles. It goes beyond language processing. SLDs impact executive functioning that can result in a poor self esteem. These are individuals who've always been judged on their IQ, as reading and writing is often seen as a measure when it's often not. This can often spark emotions and frustrations. They often face memory challenges. They can easily forget tasks and deadlines, especially when they're provided multiple instructions at once. They are very sensitive to overstimulations. They struggle with concentrating often due to movement, some disturbing sound, noise, or light. There's a gap in their oral and written performance. They are very good communicators verbally, but Their written skills are often poor. There's very slow processing. They generally take longer to process information and to read and write as well. There are also difficulties in planning. Dyslexics, they often struggle with time management, which can impact their ability to plan tasks, manage deadlines, and to keep up with their coursework. How do we screen and identify a person who has a learning disability? So, as per the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act 2016, specific learning disabilities are formally recognized. The diagnosis can only happen in or after third grade or at 8 years of age, whichever happens to be earlier. A screening is not a formal diagnosis. A formal diagnosis can only be done after 8 years, but a screening can be undertaken to for early identification to understand whether a child is at risk, and then a diagnosis is further used to confirm that. This is a process which is very similar to taking a child to an eye specialist to get them tested for their poor vision after complaints of regular complaints of a headache. As part of the screening process, it's not just the academic performance that we review, but we also understand the other two spheres where they're likely to struggle, which is their life skills as well as their emotional well being. One thing that's very important that we must keep in mind is that the screening must be done in a person's primary language, just so we can rule out factors like first generation learners, difficulties with linguistics, just to ensure that we're screening in their primary language to assess the situation most accurately. A diagnosis requires specialists like a pediatrician, a psychiatrist, a pediatric neurologist, or a clinical or rehabilitation psychologist. Diagnosis for specific learning disabilities is a three-step process. So, first, we assess whether there's something else that's contributing to the difficulties, whether it's a visual impairment or a hearing impairment. Second, we assess their IQ. So these individuals will always have an average or an above average IQ, and only then they will be screened for step three, which is a detailed psychometric test or a diagnosis for specific learning disabilities, which will give it a severity scale. So a benchmark is a 40% or more um, of that disability, and this is confirmed. Once this is confirmed, the individual can get a disability certificate or a UDID card that can be issued by any competent authority. And once they have this, they can access any facilities or schemes that are provided by the government for people with disabilities. Dyslexics are resilient when provided with the right kind of support. They find ways to excel and to do well. We'll watch another video.
I was a cheater in class, and I'll tell you why. Because in math class, for example, the teacher would put up the sum on the table, and I would work it out in my head and have the answer ready with me. And when she would ask me, or he would ask me to show the working, I wouldn't have it, right? So they always assumed I copied it from my two times, because our brains just think differently, and we tend to understand what is being said before the other person is finished saying what they're saying. And that becomes very unnerving. I didn't know my ABCDs till the fifth grade, to be very honest. The only reason I could write my name was because there was another Kunal in my class. He wrote it, I memorized it, and I simply copied it. It was as simple as that. In the younger classes, I would sit at the back. So by the time the class finished reading the chapter twice, I had memorized it. So I would just pick up on where the person dropped off and recite from my memory. My sister started a computer class in the 8th grade, and I was in the 5th, and I got intrigued by the fact that she was typing some electronic device and it was doing something magical on the screen, and I picked up on that, and I started sort of spending my breaks in the computer lab bugging the teachers and the assistants to teach me what they were doing. By the time I hit my 7th grade, I was actually doing 10th grade level programming and college school projects, and that's what became my go-to thing as an out for my lack of success in academia. And the school encouraged it. My friends encouraged it. And that's when, I decided right out of my eighth grade to get a full-time job.
So as we can hear from Kunal's example, as well, um, his school didn't again judge him for what he couldn't do, but helped him understand his strengths, and they pushed him forward based on those strengths. And today, he's a founder of a leading fintech firm and has been doing really well as an entrepreneur and also as a professional. Um, we'll do another quick activity. So you can drop the answers either on chat or you can unmute and say it. So look around. Can you name one thing that is a product of a dyslexic mind? They're very common appliances, and just look around and take a guess. Yeah, a light bulb, that's correct. Any other guesses? Hint, it's probably a device that you're holding or using currently. Okay. So dyslexia actually powers our life. Leading scientists, pioneers, a lot of them had dyslexia. Albert Einstein had dyslexia, as somebody guessed right now. The light bulb was invented by Edison, who had dyslexia. Alexander Graham Bell had dyslexia. Henry Ford, the Wright brothers, Steve Jobs, Bill Hewitt, everybody had dyslexia. So our life is actually revolving around inventions that were a product of a dyslexic mind. Another fact is that 40% self made millionaires are dyslexic. So, the icons that we see on the screen, these are all companies that have a dyslexic brain behind it. So, Virgin, Richard Branson, Walt Disney, Charles Schwab, The Body Shop, the CNN network, these are all people who have a dyslexic brain contributing to the success. Dyslexic thinking drives us all forward. That's also why we keep seeding the narrative of innovation, inclusion for innovation. When we learn to include these minds, they will drive us all forward. So you must be wondering, how does a mind that can't process language manage to make such an impact? We'll dive into that. Um, But let's hear from Richard Branson. He says that I simply wouldn't be where I am today if I wasn't dyslexic. In the real world, dyslexia can be a huge advantage. Many people with dyslexia have great imaginations, creativity, and problem solving skills. So, what he's referring to is a phenomenon that we call the dyslexic edge. The dyslexic edge is certain skills that a dyslexic mind possesses, and that includes visualizing, innovating, very good communication skills, reasoning, connecting the dots. See, a typical mind might not see a connection between two things, but a dyslexic mind will. Very good problem solving and being able to see the bigger picture. Global studies have, in fact, shown that the percentage of students with dyslexia in the fields such as engineering, arts, or entrepreneurship are twice the percentage of individuals with dyslexia in the general population due to these skills. These skills contribute to their um, learning, they contribute to their further contributing to our development. Top universities globally are attracting students with specific learning disabilities. In fact, it's so common at MIT that it's known as the MIT disease. There's Yale, Brown, Stanford, UC Berkeley, Erasmus, Ashoka, and IIM Bangalore in India. They all um, provide accommodations for students with disabilities to come access their education because they know the impact that's possible um, when you help a dyslexic mind move forward. There are several struggles that come when one is transitioning from schools to higher education. So we look at it in three ways. One is their on campus life. It's difficult for a student to disclose and to self advocate because their entire life they've been faced with judgment, they've been bullied, rejected. So isolation and stonewalling from their peers is common. They also struggle with managing daily tasks, and it's quite a big shift for them to move from the comforts of their home to a completely different environment. And they often need support systems. They also struggle with their academic life. It's hard to cope in the classroom, keeping up with the pace of the reading, the writing, note taking, etc. They struggle with managing academic tasks like planning, um, m- working around deadlines, exams. They also struggle with balancing their academic life and their college life. Their emotional well being, in turn, is impacted. They struggle with a low self esteem. They're often at risk for depression. They're often very overwhelmed with managing a new environment. There's also a lot of peer pressure to achieve, and there's high levels of anxiety, and again, the risk of overstimulation. Therefore, we want to understand what is India doing first to tap into this critical source um, pool of dyslexic thinkers, and again, why we need to do this. So, formally, the Rights of Persons with Disabilities Act has recognized specific learning disabilities in 2016. They define it as a heterogeneous group of conditions wherein there is a deficit in processing language, spoken or written, that may manifest itself as a difficulty to comprehend, speak, write, spell, or to do mathematical calculations. And it includes conditions such as perceptual disabilities, dyslexia, dysgraphia, dyscalculia, dyspraxia, and developmental aphasia as well. The RPWD Act mandates all government aided and government institutions, higher education institutes in India, to reserve 5% seats for people with disabilities. The new education policy is also in sync with the RPWD Act. It mandates that children with disabilities, and this includes those with specific learning disabilities, to fully participate in the regular schooling from the foundational stage itself and through their journey to higher education. Um, Equitable access and quality education must be ensured. Therefore, universities and colleges, according to the NEP, will be required to set up high quality support centers to support these socially disadvantaged groups to transition better to higher education. There are certain steps that the NEP lists down. So, for the government, earmarking suitable funds for the education of these socially disadvantaged groups, setting clear targets for enrollment. So, the gross enrollment rate needs to be higher, providing financial assistance and scholarships to these groups in both public and private institutions, conducting outreach programs, ensuring that these students know that there are opportunities to avail, that there are scholarships to benefit from, developing support technology tools for better participation as well as learning outcomes. Now, for the institutions, more financial assistance and scholarships, conducting outreach programs, and again providing scholarships to spread information, making admissions, and the, the admission process itself needs to be inclusive. Then, infrastructure wise, all buildings and facilities need to be disabled friendly. Bridge courses can be developed. So, when a student is transitioning from their school education to higher education, they can have a couple of months where they're kind of adjusting to the curriculum that they will be dealing with. Counseling support should be enabled. Faculty, all stakeholders, faculty members, admin members, students, they all need to be sensitized. The universities need to enforce that there's no discrimination or harassment. And lastly, um, these institutions need to push for more participation from these socially disadvantaged groups. So UGC and AICT, our regulators, have come up with very comprehensive guidelines. So from UGC, we know that the transition to HEIs needs to be supported. So from school to college, as well as from graduation to post graduation, there needs to be a need assessment board that is set up, which assesses that these are the students with disabilities and these are the needs they will require throughout their program, and that needs to be done at the beginning of the academic year and at the time of their admission. um, Imparting skills like independent living, social interaction, going a little bit beyond academics, and providing scholarships and schemes and raising awareness for the same. Student life on campus. Um, so the universities need to have accessible infrastructure from buildings to technology. Their assignments can be modified. So as opposed to traditional written exam or essays, professors can look at creative assignments or discuss with the student without reducing the rigor how they would like to be assessed. The deadlines can be lenient as they often struggle with time management. Um, Adequate accommodations need to be provided in terms of preferential seating. We don't want them to be overstimulated during exams. Providing compensatory time, which is again mandated as 20 more minutes per hour. Providing assistive technology along with training to use the devices and allowing the use of these devices. Placement and career related assistance must also be provided. Then universities need to focus on implementation. So sensitizing and focusing on capacity building at all levels is extremely important. All stakeholders need to be prepared to be inclusive. Um, there can be a training in terms of modification of the teaching and learning methods. Um, their workload, their course loads need to be accommodated in terms of their deadlines, in terms of a little extra help in terms of planning, and there needs to be adequate awareness around success stories of these students, along with their advocacy for with potential employers to let them know that you're not just filling a seat in your disability quota, but these are very bright minds that can help change the world. Lastly, governance is something that needs to be looked at to ensure that all of these systems are in place. So they need to have administrative frameworks that are ensuring action. UGC initiated a creation of the Equal Opportunity Cell, which will be the body coordinating this. Um, and to strengthen all the HEIs, UGC recommends that all these guidelines are complied with, and um, these units need to ensure that implementation, campus life for these students, and the transition is smoothly in place. And lastly, it would be ideal for a person with disability to lead and chair these units, as they are the person um, who is facing the brunt of it and who will know best how to advocate for the cause. AICT has come up with very comprehensive guidelines for inclusive education. The pillars remain the same. So, focusing on transition to higher education institutes, one, promoting admissions of students with specific learning disabilities under the PWD category. Streamlining the admission processes, making sure that the processes are smooth, that everybody at every stage is aware, providing admission accommodations for these students, again, providing scholarships and sponsorships. So, AICT actually recommends having a disability support unit in place that becomes the coordinating body for scholarships and sponsorships. Um, Student life on campus must be taken care of. Again, accessible infrastructure, access to assistive technology, both hardware and software, along with adequate training. Then in-class support, from use of technology to accessible course material. If there's something that's been given in print, it should have it should be accessible in a PDF format or in an audiobook format. It should have a QR code that takes the student to a more accessible form of that material as well. Providing exam support, the provision of scribes should be there. There should be 20 more minutes per hour. There should be a fair division between subjective and objective type questions. Um, there should be um, there should be the use computers, assistive technology should be allowed, and the separation of these students as answer sheets should be allowed, so that the evaluation is done accordingly, that the concerned person knows, is sensitized towards the needs and the accommodations that were provided to these students, and providing career support and employer sensitization. In terms of implementation, this can be carried out through Swayam courses. There can be a number of courses that are put in place to train faculty members on accommodation solutions. There should also be a PWD database management system which monitors everything from their needs to the standards of accessibility. Inclusive pedagogy should be in place. So the faculty should be trained in universal design of learning strategies as well as for evaluation and for assistive technology. This is something that should be aligned. Awareness and advocacy needs to be in place. The students need to know of their rights. There should be enough community outreach, spreading information, raising awareness, and there should be college readiness programs in place. So, if a student is transitioning, the target population is ideally students in the grades from 9th to 12th, and ensuring that they have adequate information to choose to be informed of their next decisions. College readiness programs can be in place. In terms of governance, AICT mandates that there are centers of learning diversity that are set up for students with specific learning disabilities, as well as equal opportunity facilitation cells and disability support units in all HEIs. Um, there should be encouragement of research on disabilities. So, from providing grants to funding, this is something that should be available for research and development. There should be an adequate budget allocation for the activities that are planned to promote a culture of inclusion. And inclusion cells need to be funded with the required resources as well as trained manpower. Lastly, it's important to note that the National Institutional Ranking Framework allocates points to the parameter of outreach and inclusivity, which covers everything that we've been discussing in terms of fostering a culture of inclusion. We'll now watch another video to understand from a student's journey.
Rohit was one of our early entrants into higher education. He has significant difficulties with reading and writing. The admissions committee at the college was worried whether he would be able to manage the multiple flight of stairs to his classroom. But in reality, he actually found it difficult to navigate new schedules, new systems, keeping up with his lectures, getting to his classroom on time, finding his classroom, making new friends. The list was endless. The first day he went to college, he went to the library to get his library cards, and he was pulled up for his illegible handwriting with the comment, "This is what happens when we have to fulfill quotas in admission." Not surprisingly, Rohit struggled through the first term. He was quite miserable. He spent as little time as possible at college, and it was only regular, intensive counseling that kept him on track. His exams came along, the first term exams, and he had discovered that he'd been given extra time to finish his papers, but the seat in the hall had to be vacated because the next exam was scheduled immediately after. And he was describing this to his counselor. He says, I felt like a worm. Everybody was standing in the corridor and discussing what to do with me. The principal came along and asked what was going on. And he took a different view. He pulled up the staff for not having made adequate arrangements. And he took Rohit with him. I'm going to describe this in his own words, which he told us about later. He said, "Man, he took me to his own office. He sat me down at his desk. He made space there for me. And he told me to finish my paper, take as long as I wanted. And he said, I'm sitting outside making phone calls. Don't worry, nobody's going to disturb you here." What a validation. This validation really changed his life at college. Suddenly, he was able to advocate for himself. He dived into campus activities, took part, joined some clubs. Ironically, in his last year at college, he took over a student newsletter as editor, and he made so many changes and made it so innovative that it won several awards.
We learn both the good and the bad from Rohit's journey. One is that why is something as irrelevant as a handwriting affecting a child's journey at a higher education institute? Second, while he was provided with adequate time, there was a lack of coordination. Therefore, we require sensitization and an involvement of all stakeholders to ensure equitable access. The second, we realized that the good part is that a single champion could make such a huge difference. Um, and we need to have more such people advocating because the opportunity cost is really high, and with no student should be facing the brunt of the lack of coordination from the body that needs to have it in place. So, on that note, what can we learn from global leaders? All leading institutions, they have initiatives, they have offices and bodies set in place to ensure that students with disabilities have equitable access to education and are included in the spaces. So MIT has a disability services office, um, which not only supports students but also faculty and visitors with disabilities. Yale has a Center of Dyslexia and Creativity. UCB has the Office of Disability Compliance. Stanford has Office of Accessible Education and Schwab Learning Center. Ashoka University has Office of Learning Support, and IIM Bangalore has Office of Diversity and Inclusion, Center for Teaching and Learning. These are universities globally that are doing fantastic work in terms of inclusion of students with specific learning disabilities. They are operating around four pillars. So these are the global best practices. One is providing counseling support. So consultations should be offered. These students should have an individual planning system set in place for them. Um, there should be a reasonable case by case accommodation. Awareness and advocacy should be in place, and all stakeholder interaction, whoever is going to be involved with the student's journey, that needs to be coordinated, and the support needs to be provided at the institution beyond just academic support or beyond just campus support. Academic support, again, curriculum adjustments, inclusive pedagogy, modifying learning environments, being a little flexible with attendance policies, with assignments and exams. With assistive technology, consultations on AT should be provided. There should be adequate training available to use these options, making assistive technology available for both student and faculty. So, for instance, Stanford has an assignment calculator where a student can understand their workload and how much they'll need to meet a deadline and how that has to be planned. Um, Yale actually provides a Shavitz dyslexia screener for students who might not know till their higher education journey but would like to be screened because they might be at risk. Um, Research is something that is widely supported and endorsed. So Yale actually has longitudinal studies running and several dyslexia interventions, research revolving around that. In MIT, the McGovern Institute of Brain Research is studying brain imaging, cognitive neuroscience, as well as dyslexia and reading interventions. UC Berkeley has actually invested a lot of money to further the research in neuroscience and cognition to support dyslexia. We'll hear from another expert on global best practices.
And I think what I try to do is inform the faculty of what dyslexia is. No matter how bright or accomplished or educated people have outmoded views of dyslexia. So to work with the faculty at conferences individually. And that's when you find out a number of the faculty are dyslexic. And I think we are very, very fortunate that at Yale, that people who are in administration have been very, very supportive. For example, at our Yale Center, we, anybody that thinks they might have trouble learning or have dyslexia are referred. It's amazing what different stories they have and what different beliefs there are about dyslexia. So we try to speak with the faculty, have them understand, and what people were just saying. I mean, one of the things, for example, is learning a foreign language. We were seeing so many students that were working so hard, students who were dyslexic, on their foreign language requirement, and they weren't succeeding, and it was taking their time from courses they could succeed in. So very fortunately at Yale, I was able to work with people at the highest levels and suggest that maybe we can have a partial waiver of the foreign language to understand the country, the culture.
We'll hear from another global expert.
It is the key, basically. Being able to design a curriculum that is inclusive is that where we all kind of strive. And I guess that at university, it can be quite difficult because it is really engaging a variety of academics, a variety of courses, and they all have different challenges. But for example, starting for exams can be really difficult for neurodiverse students, and writing under time pressure and so on. So even a change in the way that assessment is done and providing kind of a different way of assessing, not just one way, but so for example, allowing people to show what they know in different ways. And it could be by writing, it could be by presenting, it could be by debating, it could be, in by portfolio. Of course, it is dependent on the course, but just introducing a different way of assessment.
Okay. So, learning from the two global experts, we'll try and understand how we can create a framework, a backbone to enable inclusion at higher education institutes. So, the first thing is coordination, streamlining accommodations for students with specific learning disabilities across the universities, facilitating individualized accommodations for each student, lobbying with faculty to make them understand what the students' needs are and how they can be provided, working towards awareness and advocacy for students with specific learning disabilities and learning diversity, offering individual tutoring, supplementing the academic support that is provided, and providing career and placement related help. For on campus support, ensuring that there is inclusion into campus life, that they are managing, okay, that they're adjusting into the hostel life, they're adjusting with the clubs and the societies, ensuring that the clubs and societies are aware of inclusion as a culture and workshops are being held for them to understand. Providing campus handbooks and resources in accessible formats, like we discussed, that if there's something that's available in print, an accessible e-version of it should also be available. There should be adequate access to support groups and buddy systems and mental health services for a person to settle down. Technological support should be provided in terms of both training and the technology itself. Um, Mainstreaming the usage of these assistive technologies in curriculum should be ensured. Workshops with faculty on assistive technologies should be held regularly to help them understand the usage and why it should be mainstreamed as well. Technological assistance with time management and schedule management for these students should be provided. Lastly, research should really be encouraged, advocating for centers of neurodiversity, and just promoting research by neurodiverse scholars is something that an institution can work towards. There should be encouragement of research to develop and to innovate more in terms of assistive technologies. And there should be adequate partnerships and lobbying with various organizations that provide grants and funding to further research. In terms of supporting students transition better to higher education institutes, academic support should be provided in terms of academic support should be provided in terms of course material being accessible in the digital format. Swayam courses should be made available in accessible formats. There should be instructional aids that are available, like note takers, scribes, devices that can be used for the same. Alternative assignment deadlines should be in place. These students require a little bit of flexibility, and that should be provided. There should be adequate accommodations in terms of exams with compensatory time, with distraction free zones, and clarification of questions if needed. There should be tutoring, academic counseling, academic support, and buddies that should be available for these students. In terms of student life transition, there should be counseling support available for that as well. There should be coaching available in terms of planning academics as well as balancing the rest of the college life. There should be adequate availability of accommodations based on their individual needs. There should be advocates and champions available on campus who are furthering this inclusion narrative. There should be mental health support available on campus, and faculty capacity building and campus buddies should be available for the same as well. And there should be adequate access to resources. So, schemes, stipends, scholarships, they should all um, be provided to students with specific learning disabilities. Adequate awareness should be raised around them. So AICT has Saksham, which is benefiting a lot of students. There should be a demonstration of AT usage. So while the resource itself might be available, a student might not know how to leverage it. There should be assistance in making academic course material accessible. So if something is a book, there should be provisions in place to ensure that a student can use it with an immersive reader or with an OCR scanner as well. There should be provisions to help them transition to employment opportunities. They should be provided with training. They should be provided with adequate opportunities to um, move ahead successfully. There should be employer sensitization, and there should be adequate information available for the students to know who are inclusive employers and where they have certain chances. We must remember that when inclusive classrooms are designed well, they are not just helping students with specific learning disabilities, but they are helping all students learn better. We learn from another global expert.
The whole idea behind universal design is that it's important for every student. And here in the Academic Center for Excellence at Bryant, we also have our support services for our international students. Are finding that if we focus on just disability, it's harder for them because they see that as a small segment of the population. But if we focus on all students, and we also talk about our English as a second language students, that we can really show that universal design concepts can apply for them and can help them to learn more effectively in the classroom. So for example, even doing something like adding captions to your videos can help English, students who are studying the English language to know exactly what's happening in the classroom and to better access the material. Also, if we provide note-taking technology that students who may not be able to write quickly, whether they have learning disabilities or they aren't able to fluently write in English, are able to succeed. So it's really a matter of taking those universal design concepts and helping the faculty to know that it's not just students with disabilities. And university-wide, if we talk about this, it's much better than if it comes just out of my area, because they don't necessarily see that then as applying to the whole population.
So just reiterating once again them and how they can help everyone learn better, how simple accommodations like captions can help somebody whose second language is English, and how universal accessibility can be a lens that we incorporated into our daily ways of going about teaching and learning. So, lastly, where should you begin with everything that we've spoken about in detail? Here are 5 digestible starting points for you. So, start at the beginning, make admissions inclusive, start increasing the enrollment of students with specific learning disabilities in the PWD categories, start tracking success stories of students who are excelling, who are doing well. Sensitization and awareness is key. Make sure that all stakeholders are sensitized and are on the same page about inclusion. Accommodations, again, under the 2Cs, classrooms and curriculum needs to be provided. Um, Creating centers of support, having a coordinating body or a unit in place that is responsible for a seamless transition and for other activities being in place, and for monitoring as well. And lastly, championing the cause yourself and consciously building a culture of inclusion. So with that, we've come to the end of the presentation. Just to gauge how the presentation has gone, I would like you all to scan this QR code for the post-session survey.
Thank you, Bhavya. I would like to thank you, Bhavya Changing, for very informative and interesting session in which you have taken the various examples of dyslexic persons. A dyslexic person has got good communication power and good reasoning power. Problem solving is also good, but you have told that written skills may be poor in dyslexic students. There was also an informative session about the RPWD Act 2016 and the steps taken by the government and the AICT for PWD students for higher education. Really informative session. Thank you, Bhavya.
Thank you so much, ma'am. And we would really like to thank AICT for being supportive and for helping us carry these out effectively.
Most welcome.
All right. Thank you so much, everyone, for joining and for connecting. We hope it was an informative session and that you all have action points to get started with. And once again, thank you, AICT, for helping us. Somebody is requesting for the presentation. It will be available. So this was live streamed and it will be available on AICT's YouTube channel.